Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our June seminar with Gary McQuaid. This will be our final seminar of our 2021-2022 season. We will reconvene again in September. My name is Dawn Hansen. I'm the Executive Director of the Bulkley Valley Research Center. Great to see some new names for our seminars, and we hope you continue to join us for future seminar series. We do share out our information via Facebook, our website, and you can also sign up for our newsletters if you like on our website at bvcenter.ca. I'd like to welcome Gary this afternoon, and we're really looking forward to this presentation of mountain goats in the Skeena region. There's an abundance of knowledge here, and I have it on good authority that this master's actually should have been a PhD. It was so thorough. So I'm really excited to hear from Gary today. One of the blind spots that Gary is highlighting is for scientists and managers to integrate more local ecological knowledge of experts who frequently interact with and monitor mountain goats. It's been overlooked in the role that it can play in localized management programs. And Gary interviewed local experts throughout the Skeena region and participating in this study. And Gary's been a resident of and traveling back and forth between Rupert and Terrace for about 20 years in this region. So welcome, Gary, and thanks very much for your time this afternoon.
Oh, thank you. Glad to talk about all this stuff. Yeah, thanks for asking me to present. Hello, everybody. Before I start, I would just like to acknowledge that I'm giving this presentation in Prince Rupert, which is on the unceded coastal territories of the Tsimshian Nation. So as I already said, my name is Gary McQuaid, and I'm here just to present research I conducted between 2018 and 2021 for the Environment and Management graduate program at Royal Roads University, entitled, as you know, Local Ecological Knowledge of Mountain Goats in the Skeena Region and its Importance to Wildlife Management. So just to give a brief introduction, approximately 1/4 of the global population of mountain goats resides in British Columbia's Skeena region, where for millennia, they have been and still are interacting with humans, not only as a valuable resource, but also an important component of local cultures. My presentation here, I'll describe this relationship between humans and mountain goats in the Skeena region and its importance, as I said earlier, to wildlife conservation and management. So here's just a brief preview of the contents that I'll go through. At first, I'll just describe to you. I'm just trying to move this cursor around, so I got too many screens going here. But sorry. So at first, I'm just going to kind of give a brief explanation of what local ecological knowledge actually is. I'll also briefly describe what a mountain goat is, its importance to people in the area. I'll briefly go over my methods. And then getting into the results, I'll talk about local expert experience, and I will describe what a local expert actually is too. Their experience in harvest practices. I'll talk a bit about the relationships between managers and local experts, and then perceptions of population statuses. And then I'll also go over some observed declines in mountain goat populations in the area and what that means with respect to management and local experts. And then, yeah, I'll just end it with a bit of a discussion. So I think it's important that I describe what I mean by local ecological knowledge, because in the fields of environmental management and academic research for that matter, there are some issues with how it's defined and represented. I'm not going to get too far into that, but for this presentation, I really just want to give a clear definition of what the definition that I used for my research. So ecological knowledge in general is obviously a critical component of wildlife conservation. I think it's safe to say that the most commonly known method to obtain ecological knowledge are those through formal methods of Western science. That is for for wildlife management, conservation research, and such. So, however, other types of methods to obtain ecological knowledge exist and are studied within the fields of ethnoecology, ethnobiology, and then particularly to this study, ethnozoology. A type of knowledge that contributes to all these fields is local ecological knowledge. And a simple way to define it is that it is knowledge obtained. I don't know what happened there. Sorry. Is that it is knowledge obtained. Sorry, guys, my notes got all messed up. It is knowledge obtained and developed and practiced by people within their respective environments. So this could be commercial salmon fishers on knowing specific salmon migrations within the specific areas that they might have been fishing for the last 20, 30, 40 years. Or it could even be of a farmer of certain factors related to soil fertility within the respective plots that this farmer works in. In this research, it's about those who interact with specific mountain goat populations within the Skeena region. And in this case, in this research, is mostly hunters and outfitters. And then I have one wildlife tour guide in there as well. So a commonality between obtaining ecological knowledge through either LEK, like local ecological knowledge, the acronym LEK, or formal methods of Western science, is that they should stand to some degree of rational skepticism. So for my research, to ensure that LEK can stand to a certain degree of this, I apply the following criteria. So first, LEK is developed and refined through empirical channels of observation and experience. The knowledge is not abstract or based on indirect speculation. Instead, it's based on direct observations in the field. Second, LEK is developed within a variety of ecological and geographical circumstances over wide temporal scales. So observations are not one-time occurrences, but are conducted within the same locales over multiple seasons and sometimes over decades. So like an example would be, the observation, say, from a hunter on a mountain goat population, and that hunter might have been to this location once or twice, but I consider those observations relatively weak compared to a hunter who's been going to that same habitat seasonally for, say, 20, 30 years. That would be considered, it's a component which makes it obviously much more robust information. And then finally, the third one is based on expertise. So it's knowing how to reliably interpret any kind of ecological phenomena does take experience and skill. And this is a defining attribute of the proponents of local ecological knowledge, or as I'll just continue to call them, the local experts. So I'll just sum this up. LEK is not random observations by random people. That might be termed something perhaps a bit more something akin to anecdotal knowledge, which has its own merits and its own uses. But I consider LEK as separate from that. So LEK, it's basically knowledge that is refined through these aforementioned criteria. So, okay, I've defined what LEK is, and please afterwards or even after this whole presentation, if you wish to ask me more questions about it, I'd be glad to answer. I'm going to give a brief description of what a mountain goat is. I'm sure all of you know what a mountain goat is, but throughout my research, I had so many people asking me if mountain goats were those animals with the big round hordes who smash each other in the heads. And obviously that's not what a mountain goat is. But a mountain goat is an ungulate. It's distinguished by white fur, sharp black horns. They're known for their exceptional climbing abilities. And their normal habitat is usually found in steep, craggy, cliffy terrain, usually within or in proximity to alpine terrain. There are some exceptions to that, though. They've been found in canyons such as the Skeena and even in places in the Nass. Mountain goats are distributed throughout much of Western North America's landscapes. In 2008, that's kind of a while ago now, the global population, all of it within North America, was estimated somewhere between 80,520 to 118,790. 48 to 56% of the global population resides in BC, and 49% of that is in the Skeena region, outlined here in blue. And all these censuses were taken in 2008 as well. And so this is pretty old data. So mountain goats and people. So mountain goats interact with and are important to people in British Columbia in a variety of contexts. Certain First Nations have long-standing relationships with mountain goats in a number of ways, including that which is represented in their oral histories, and laws, resource management practices, and arts. Mountain goats are a component of BC tourism in the form of wildlife viewing and hunting. License and permit fees for hunting mountain goats provide economic contributions to the BC government, and they are also an important source of food for many people. I stated earlier that this presentation is based on research conducted between 2018 and 2021 for the Environment and Management Program at Royal Roads. My primary data was sourced from interviewing 11 hunters, outfitters, and 1 wildlife tour guide. I also interviewed 4 wildlife managers from the Ministry of Forests, Lands, Natural Resource Operations, and Rural Development. I'm not going to say that. I'm just going to say Flynn Rural from now on, as well as 3 researchers who specialize in mountain goats. And finally, I conducted a spatial analysis of numerous sections of the landscape within the Skeena region, and these regarding observations of local mountain goat populations by the interview participants. So my research, it was well over 200 pages long, and it would definitely be impossible for me to present all of this in such a short presentation. So for clarity's sake, I chose some of the more broader topics in the research and to present them here. I did my best to simplify it and make it kind of acceptable within this context, like in this presentation. Please feel free to contact me for any questions or clarity on anything. I found it pretty difficult to narrow it all down into a presentation. It took me a while, so I might have made mistakes or be missing certain factors. So please feel free to contact me. So 3 broad topics, and the first of these is the nature and extent of local expert experience, skill, and harvest practices. So one of the prominent findings of my research is that local experts can meaningfully describe population characteristics and make empirical inferences about the size, density, life histories, and declines, if those are observed, of local mountain goat populations. Some local experts that I interviewed even take their own monitoring, like outside of any hunting efforts, but they'll just go up into the habitat simply to monitor mountain goats, and or even in the case of outfitters, they might go fly over their tenures just for the pure purpose of monitoring and getting a handle on what's going on out there. One of the outfitter participants, who's been a guide now for well over 20 years, and he had at least I asked him this number, and he gave me a rough estimate, but he said he has at least 100 mountain goat hunts under his belt. All these too within specific like repeatedly within specific habitats, not just spread out all over the place randomly. Like he'd be going to the same area seasonally year after year after year. And he's been journaling all his observations, and these observations would include, population counts, demographics, recruitment, yeah, and I can only, a lot of really useful and meaningful data. And then another finding I had is that these local experts would not only be monitoring such things as population dynamics and demographics and such, but they also are pretty concerned about mountain goat health. And that can be for animals they harvest. So they'll be monitoring, keeping an eye on the condition of the teeth and maybe the fat content of the animal, or any signs of parasites or disease. And then also for the living animals that they see. And most of that is just signs of sickness for such things as like or, any other diseases such as that. So I just gave a very brief, very brief descriptions of my findings pertaining to local expert experience. Local expert harvest practices are also important. However, they're a pretty important component of my research. And I did study this because it provides some indication of how mountain goats are harvested, but also I want to get an understanding of the perceptions by local experts related to conservation. So a prominent finding based on harvest practices considers that for female mountain goats, which 9 out of the 11 hunter and outfitter participants deemed acceptable, as long as certain criteria were met, and that's seen in this slide here. Now, Flynn Road encourages hunters to not harvest females because compared to other ungulates, females reproduce relatively late in their life and have relatively few offspring. So basically, if they're killed, it does put a significant strain on the population. But female harvest of mountain goats is not illegal, and generally because they are pretty hard to distinguish, females from males in the field, especially in a hunting context. Whereas, mountain goats might be, hundreds, like even a kilometer or two away, while the hunter tries to identify them. So all the reasons in this table or criteria for female harvest were important and interesting, but the most cited criteria, as you can see on the bottom, was that harvest be of what's called quote unquote dry nanny. So a dry nanny is supposed to be a female mountain goat that is too old to produce young. So the logic in this is sound. Like, if a female mountain goat is actually too old to produce young, then in the context of population stability, like just in that context, it does make sense that would be acceptable to harvest. However, a couple of the participating researchers that I interviewed, they contended that there's absolutely no such thing as a dry nanny. Female mountain goats have been observed to reproduce relatively late into their life. They do reach an age of sterility, but it's pretty rare that any mountain goat will even live that long. So there's just a good chance that they don't even reach sterility because they die beforehand. But then it's also another important factor in this is female mountain goats, depending on their age, they'll generally skip reproduction every 3 years, and their kids die. So if a female mountain goat is observed without kids, which is pretty common, like I've seen lots of females by themselves, it simply could mean that their kid died that year before the observation. Okay, next slide. So I'll talk a little bit more about harvest practices. 8 out of the 11 outfitters and hunters had preferences for the age of the mountain goat they harvest. So as you can see in the chart here, these preferences varied, and then as well as the reasonings behind them. Some of the reasons were pretty interesting. Some local experts contended that, you know, an adult mountain goat, you can't eat them, that the meat is too tough. And then some others said, well, they only harvest young mountain goats because the meat is palatable and you can carry it off the mountain. Other participants, and then those participants that targeted adult mountain goats, that was usually in the context of trophy hunting, which trophy hunting is always after the biggest animal, basically. The researchers that I interviewed, they said there was some issues with targeting adult mountain goats, which was the highest, as you see in the chart here, the highest cited reason. So studies that, I'm going to try to explain this as clearly as possible, but I'm going to give a really brief summary of dynamics here pertaining to the age of a mountain goat. So studies at Skeena Region, Alberta, they have shown that males must reach at least 4 years of age to mate, period. And as you can see here in adults, generally, you know, any mountain goat over 3 years. And they're most likely to be successful in mating after 6 years of age. And according to the research that I'm referring to here, and then the peak of reproductive success for a male peaks at 8 years of age. And then the survival rate of mountain goats male mountain goats starts to significantly decrease at 9 years of age. So when that mountain goat might be harvested would obviously have would certainly impact the population with respect to whether or not that goat was able to contribute to the population's recruitment. So, and another, this is also compounded by the fact that male mountain goats die a lot more than female mountain goats. And for a male to even reach adulthood is actually a pretty significant thing in a population. So, you know, if that adult is taken out, it's basically, you know, you might be losing a pretty important member. And then within some populations, adult males are relatively rare. Like they're of the smaller numbers for sure. And so what the participants said, like the best demographic to harvest in a population, like a productive population with lots of males around, is young fillies. And the one researcher says yearlings are even the best, but he doubted that most hunters would be interested in that. Okay, so got my next slide here. So these last two slides, which describe the distinction between views of sustainable harvest selection, I argue that it highlights the need for improved communications between managerial entities and users. In this respect, I argue that through the application of LEK to management, communications would naturally improve, which you know, I speculate would foster a type of bilateral education. So users, hunters, outfitters would gain insights into mountain goat dynamics, which might improve harvest selection. But at the same time, you know, those users could be providing a lot of pretty important data towards management. So this brings me to the second results topic, the relationship between managers and local experts and their perceptions of overall mountain goat population status. And I need to take a drink of water because my mouth is getting pretty dry. Okay. So one of the questions I asked local experts was how they rated management pertaining to mountain goats in the Skeena region. I asked these questions because I think these opinions are valuable to wildlife conservation because they offer a separate perspective than one might be available to those who administer or create policies. So this particular perspective is based on boots on the ground, people that, hunters and outfitters who would be experiencing these policies and then also seeing the results. There were some constraints in my interview process, and I was only able to ask 8 of the local experts these questions. As you can see here, 4 of the local experts stated that management was adequate, and they were referring to certain harvest allocation systems, like the limited entry hunting system. For instance, one was pretty happy that within the Greater Terrace Smithers area that it's all limited entry hunting, or mostly limited entry hunting. And another outfitter stated that the number of harvest allocations for his outfit, he thought that they were relatively accurate. Those participants that deemed management as inadequate based their opinions on the ministry's general lack of knowledge of mountain goat populations in the Skeena region. And so this is not new news. Managers themselves, when I talked to them, told me the same thing. Mountain goat inventory of the Skeena region is relatively low compared to how much terrain there is and mountain goat populations within it. I think to actually have a real inventory of all the mountain goats within the Skeena region would be quite a huge deal. But so what we do have is relatively small groups for inventory. And then so that was generally probably the most common criticism I heard was that managers just don't have a lot of the ecological knowledge to manage with. And then one outfitter participant stated that the ministry's mandate should move from one data based on maintenance to one of proactivity. He stated that the goal of simply not letting a species get red listed is not good enough. So managers and researchers, they generally acknowledged and expressed value for the importance of hunter and outfitter knowledge of mountain goats. One researcher stated, these are the people on the ground. So definitely that is very, very useful information. I'm quoting here, by the way, especially for people who've been at a long time and can remember how things were 20, 30, 40 years ago. With respect to population declines observed by local experts, another participant researcher stated, well, that'd be very useful. If people's livelihood depends on finding goats and they are not finding them, then they're probably correct. So some managers and researchers commented about the nature of individual perceptions for such risk as confirmation biases. And I think this is a very, very important point and one that should always be considered. And in this, an important factor worth considering with respect to such things as how confirmation bias might affect, say, local ecological knowledge is that there are a myriad of other stakeholders who affect mountain goat populations, such as those based in industry, environmental protection, and even science. And they all have their own particular interests and agendas that influences the data they produce and obviously the questions they ask. So I argue that, yeah, a risk of bias in any kind of information is certainly legitimate consideration. It's certainly legitimate, and it definitely should be that concern, or that should be considered with respect to LEK. But I do argue that this same degree of risks should also be applied to, and I think it is, to all types of ecological information. So, and then that's just the task of a manager, is you get information coming in, and you got to factor in those elements to it. All right, the next slide. So another finding pertaining to the relationships between local experts and managers is that outfitter participants particularly the outfitter participants, expressed a sense of disengagement from the ministry with respect to offering their local knowledge. While most of the participant managers and researchers describe the value of local knowledge by experienced people, some specifying outfitters, a couple stated that they simply have limited time to seek such information. And currently sourcing local ecological knowledge is not a formal part of the government management system. I asked this question, I asked stuff about this to some of the participating researchers, and one agreed that say local outfitter knowledge would be a valuable resource, but he also talked that there would be a conflict of interest. And then because he said that, you know, an outfitter could simply give false information, say about mountain goat numbers and their tenure just to get a better quota. And that makes sense. And then I talked to, I know one of the outfitters I talked to actually said the same thing. He says, well, I think older generations used to actually do that. He stated he thinks they used to lie, and they also used to be kind of hard on the managers. And so he said that there was probably some bad blood. But he contended now, he says, with the new generation of outfitters that they're very, very eager to contribute to management, and they have a much more of I guess a conservation-based mind. And a couple of the outfit managers stated that they would be very willing to fly with their own aircraft, because they all have their own aircraft, managers or biologists, whoever, over their tenures, just to show the status of their populations. So part of the second topic considers the perceptions of mountain goat population status for the whole Skeena region. Out of 11 local experts, 6 described localized declines in the Skeena region, and 1 perceived a general decline, and 3 contended population stability. 2 managers viewed the region's populations as generally stable with declines in certain areas, while 1 manager perceived general decline and another did not present an opinion on the subject. I didn't ask the 2 researchers about this because they just simply, they didn't reside in BC. But however, one researcher, Jim Easterday, he resides in Smithers, and he stated that populations are in the Skeena region, or he said generally healthy, but certainly there are localized declines. Findings based on the second objective also found the most cited threat to mountain goat populations by managers and researchers was industry, while that for local experts was predation and hunting. It was beyond the scope of my research to get into why these differences occurred. I simply speculate that it's just basic, it's based on different paradigms of knowledge. Local experts, they get all their observations are in the field, like pretty well 100% of it, while managers and researchers, they have some field experiences, but a huge proportion of that is also in more of an academic, bureaucratic, and administrative context, all of which are you know, valuable and necessary. So getting on to declines, the last topic of the 3 topics. So 7 out of the 11 local experts observed local population declines. In this section, I will review the observations of these declines and describe like the potential explanatory factors made by local experts. And I'll also provide a bit of my own analysis of these declines. I included this in my research to obviously inform that there might be some declines in these areas, but more so just to exemplify the value of local expert knowledge, and you know, how it's important and what it can do to help this management. So here is a table showing a table and a map showing areas of declines alongside the causal speculations made by local experts. And in the following slides, I'm just going to get in a bit more detail on these causes, potential causes. So predation. Predation was cited by local experts for 17 of the 30 study areas. And as you can see in the previous slide here, these study areas were, there's not 30 here. Well, there is 30 here, but these are all broken down in subsections. I just didn't show them here. So you hear me saying numbers like 30 and stuff like that. That's what I'm referring to. So predation, yeah, was cited for 17 of the 30 study areas. And these observations were based on local experts either seeing predators, witnessing a predation event, or seeing predator scat with a mountain goat hare in it. One interesting observation was made in 2020 of these by an outfitter manager in his guides. He was telling me that right around the Douglas Channel area in the mountains above there, they've been seeing an unusual amount of golden eagles, which normally they wouldn't see that many, if any, of. And then they even watched a golden eagle feeding on a mountain goat, which is interesting. So obviously it was beyond the scope of my project to ground truth any of these speculations of predation. But the significance of predation shouldn't be underestimated. I used to underestimate it until I did this research. The Ministry of Environment's 2010 Mountain Goat Management Plan states that predation is likely the most important cause for mountain goat mortality. And then likewise, Steve Cote, one of the researchers who specializes in mountain goats, he described predation as a cause for a significant decline from 175 to 30 individuals in a mountain goat population he has been studying for decades on Kaw Ridge in Alberta. Climate change was another factor local experts associated with declines. For example, 2 outfitters observed decreasing perennial snowpacks alongside significant population declines in the southern portion of their tenure, outlined in blue here. And then stable populations in the rest of the tenure outlined in black. Both guides noted that the northern part of their tenure have relatively high distributions of high elevation landscape and more alpine terrain than the south. And I just did a bit of an elevational analysis, and you can see the difference there. Observed population decline in the lower elevation areas compared to stable population declines in the higher elevations might, and I emphasize might, indicate that the effects of climate change are negatively affecting populations at lower elevations. However, I also found that many of the other study areas have relatively high distributions of high elevation landscape, which is seen on this map, but are still experiencing decline. So I think the main problem in this analysis, which was very, very quick and simple, I did not get into climate change that much. I just did a very, very brief kind of look here just in this context. But in this study, one of the prominent issues is that there are so many other factors that can contribute to the observed declines, such as overhunting. So I just I couldn't narrow it down and really define whether how much climate change is responsible. I from the research that I've read on it and stuff, I think climate change is certainly a real factor for mountain goats and something that is of concern. But with respect to this particular research, I couldn't find anything too conclusive. Some indications perhaps, but that's about it. Overhunting, or just hunting pressure in general, was cited by local experts for 4 study areas. Using ministry harvest data, I analyzed historical harvest rates for all the study areas. Out of all the study areas with recorded harvest rates, so that was 23 out of 30 that actually had recorded harvests in them, I found that 33% have experienced periods with historically high harvest rates, and then 23% with moderate harvest rates, and then 43% with relatively low harvest rates. Female harvest is of particular concern for mountain goat populations, and 23% of the study areas experienced high harvest rates, 13% moderate, 64% low. And Anthropogenic disturbance, it's a hot topic, to mountain goats was also cited by some participants. This study considered a variety of anthropogenic activities, including motorized and non-motorized recreation, and I made an attempt to determine the degree to which they occur in the study areas. All right, last slide. So findings from my research has shown that local experts have exceptional knowledge of particular mountain goat populations and their habitat. Managers and researchers see the stability of mountain goats and threats to mountain goats through different circumstances and contexts, but which taken together could be exceptionally useful for management in attaining a broader and even more accurate ecological knowledge, which I argue in turn would simply strengthen the conservation of mountain goats. My study has also found that managers and researchers view sustainable harvest selection differently than each other. Than from participating hunter and outfitters. These types of distinctions can have negative effects on hunted mountain goat populations. And then part of my argument is that incorporating LEK into management would foster a certain type of bilateral education between local experts, managers, and researchers. Some managers and researchers note the value of localized knowledge from experienced people. But problems exist, though, pertaining to localized knowledge, resources to incorporate it, and pathways between local experts and management entities. In my paper, I get right into the details of this, but I think all these issues could be overcome with a gradual incorporation of LEK into management systems. And then I just described declines in mountain goat populations in conjunction with a variety of causal factors. Many of the areas of noted declines were not in the ministry's purview. They're just areas that had no inventory, no record of inventories. So that just further shows how LEK can fill these important gaps. And then just to sum it all up, my research was undertaken to determine the extent of local ecological knowledge of mountain goats in the Skeena region and its importance to wildlife management. The study has found that LEK of mountain goats is abundant in the Skeena region, and it can provide a significant contribution to the management of the species. And I'm done. See you later.
Thanks so much, Gary. What a wealth of information you've uncovered there. It's super fascinating. Is there a place where people can access your master's publicly? Is it?
Yeah. Let me put it. I can just give you a link in the chat here.
Super.
If that will do that.
Yeah.
It's not okay. I'll have to try here quick.
Okay. Thanks for that.